Ruggiero, and today I'm going to talk about being the Daydream believer, which is how to manage people who aren't doing their best work. So who am I? This is who I am. It's a picture of my face. I am a senior engineering manager in voice connectivity at Twilio, and I worked at other places too. These are some of them. One of them was Sharethrough. I want to thank Sharethrough and the sponsors for putting this on, so we should clap at this point. And I think Dan Greenberg told me to say that everything I learned at Sharethrough, so I just said that. So great. But what we're going to talk about is how people are different. We're going to have a story about TED, something not to do, something to do instead, and then we'll review. So some people on your team may not be doing well. Let's say this is so. It happens sometimes. But specifically, one person in particular needs to get better. And they're not doing terrible. They're not the worst person you've ever managed, but they're not really moving forward. And you're seeing this happen over and over again. The first thing you need to remember is that people are different. So I know that you know that, but I think also as engineering managers or as people who are becoming engineering managers or are new to management, you need to start with what your frame is. And if you're managing people, there's a strong possibility that you have thought more about fix the broken things, do more, be focused, get it done. It's part of what made you gravitate towards management, but that is you. So take a second and separate yourself from your reports, because that's something that you focus on, but make sure you understand the stories that your reports are telling you. So one hack that I use sometimes is to think of myself as a high school guidance counselor. The people who are in your team, even if you hired every single one of them, they're coming from all different places and all different backgrounds, and you should think of it as a high school guidance counselor got assigned the letters A through J. And whichever student would come in was just another person in the alphabet. So mapping yourself to all of their perspectives is comforting, and it's nice to do, but think of them as a random collection of people, and you need to make sure that you're investigating what's going on with them and getting curious about what it is that they want. So one question that I ask in one-on-ones is, what do you want to do in 5 years? And people laugh and they are uncomfortable because that's kind of a weird question. And then you say, what about 10 years? What about 30 years? And again, what you're trying to find out is, what are their daydreams? When they stop and think about where they're going and why they're even coming to work every day, you want to take a temperature check on that and find out what are they thinking about their own lives. Now, of course, some people will say, why are you asking me these questions? That's a weird question to ask me. You can keep it light by talking about what you want to do. You can say, these are some of my daydreams, and here's some crazy ones. Keep it light, but be persistent, because some people will be reluctant to do it. They'll be a little uncomfortable with that. But it's your job to get really curious here about what people are thinking about. So Ted is someone who worked for me. He was really smart, and we hired him as a senior engineer. But I noticed after a good long time, he really wasn't making an impact. There were important initiatives that were happening, and I was encouraging him to get involved. We need your help to design these solutions. And he wasn't really collaborating with the team, and he wasn't taking a large part in the new projects. And I was just like, I wonder what's happening here. This person really should be taking off based on everything I'm looking at on paper, but it's not really happening. So in our one-on-one, I said, hey, write down the 10 things you really want to do that don't involve your current role. Now, I could think of 5 to 10 things that I really want to do that don't involve my current role, and they tend to be engineering-y types of things, like learn this technology or go back to school and get a graduate degree or things like that. Other things that are a little more off the res, but that was the main thing that I would think about. And the first thing he said was commodity trading. Okay. Become a scuba instructor. Okay, that's a different thing. And then the third thing he said was flip houses. So none of these things had anything to do with his day-to-day job. And it turns out a lot of his friends were doing things like this. So he was trying to figure out, maybe they're onto something. But he wasn't looking at his job and saying, this is who I am, which is something that I do every day. Like I think of, I'm an engineering manager. I think about being engineering manager stuff. So people are different. He and I were not alike, and I had to get out of my own mindset to understand where he was coming from in order to kind of get through and understand what was happening. So, what do you do? Remember, he was hired as a senior engineer, and he wasn't performing at the level that I had kind of hoped he would. Now, a lot of management books will say, here's what you do. You put them on a plan. Performance Improvement Plan, a PIP. And we'll talk about that in a minute, but here's the thing. When you are all managery and you decide, I'm going to put this person on a PIP, you have to really think about it carefully and structure your thinking. Now, is it measurable? Are you giving them kind of an abstract PIP of, I want you to improve? If this person were measurably awful, you probably wouldn't be having this conversation with yourself because you'd be like, well, their performance really isn't what it needs to be, and you wouldn't even be debating it in your own mind. But then again, you could say, no, I'm going to give them a PIP. But then if you give them a PIP, it's too hard because you see the area of weakness. Then you're sort of setting that person up for failure. If you think that the person needs to work more with peers, and that's a real blocker for them, then when they don't do it, you can say, well, I gave you a chance. And if you are afraid of terminating this person's employment, you might give them something that's too easy, and then the problem isn't really getting solved. So before you do a PIP, make sure that you're able to do these three things. Create a measurable goal that's not too hard, but also doesn't lower the bar too much. But I would say don't. Take a breath. Don't do it yet. And let's shift gears a little bit and go back to what you're trying to achieve here. So, daydream believer. Why are their daydreams important? He had all these interesting ones. He was flipping houses or commodity trading, all over the place. And I could have said, things need to improve because I am the manager and I say so. But that wasn't even where his head was at all. This book, Shivani talked about this book. It's a very good book called Difficult Conversations, and it talks a lot about having these kinds of conversations you need to have with someone. And some of these are hard, but they will be harder if you decide that what you're going to do is tell somebody what they need to do to change. Because if that is your mindset, and I'll read this quote because it's kind of long, how often do you change based on what someone tells you? And how likely are you to do that when the person who's trying to change you doesn't seem fully aware of the reason you see things differently? So again, telling how many times in your life has someone said, change, and you just did it because someone told you to, even if your job was on the line? So what people need is feedback more than they want your advice. You have tons of advice to give. You have advice. But feedback, people want to know that you actually know them for that feedback to stick. So this is a framework. It's a little bit similar to some of the frameworks we've been talked about today. It's for the Center for Creative Leadership, and it's called Situation, Behavior, and Impact. So essentially, you capture the situation, and you're very specific. You describe some behavior, but you remove some of the adjectives that make it more pejorative or judgy, and you acknowledge the impact using statements that are linked to the impact that you've observed. So here's an example. I've noticed that the last 5 epics, you haven't really participated in the design phase. When the epics are announced, you haven't volunteered to participate in the design. I think of you as a senior member of this team, and it has me really curious about what's going on. What do you think is happening? And then you've opened the conversation to, I've observed this behavior. I'm wondering what's going on. Help me understand. So, situation, behavior, impact. I think what I want to advocate is, rather than give them a PIP or give them a lecture or give them advice, give them a project. And on that project, give them relevant, constructive feedback. be direct regarding the context of why you're giving them that project. I want to see you grow in this area. I want to be able to delegate to you. You can talk to people in their one-on-ones about how do they want to grow, and then find stretch goals or projects that map to those personal goals that they have. But in Ted's case, I told him, I said, I really want to be able to delegate stuff to you. I want to be able to give a significant project to you and have you execute it and have me not stand over your shoulder. That's what I want. And it's a little tricky picking that project. You want to pick something that's not trivial, but it can't be critical either. And I agree, I can see that that's not easy to pick. But there's a lot of ways you can collaborate with people in picking that project. So there may be something around process that needs to change. There may be something around the architecture that they see as needing improvement. Just broken Windows stuff that no one else has tended to. There's all kinds of things you can do, and part of your work here is helping them pick this project and make sure it's right size so you can really give them a lot of beefy feedback. One other thing, too, that you can do is find your boss's pet project, the thing that really bugs your boss, and find a way of getting this person involved in that project. That really raises their visibility, because the chances are that you see this person is not doing that well, other people in the org might be seeing that as well, including your boss. And so raising that person up and saying, hey, why don't you pitch the vice president on this idea that you have? Why don't we put a presentation together that you'll present, but I'll help you fine-tune it as we go? Again, that's a way of raising visibility on this project, but also telling them this is important. This is important for you. And again, feedback. Going through the project with them, helping them as they go, and saying, here's some of the things I'm seeing. Here's some of the behavior that's going on, and here's the impact that it's having. And use the project to highlight the kind of improvement you're looking for. If they're doing well, you have something to reinforce them. Here's where you're doing well. This has impact. This is really great. If they're not doing that well, you can say, hey, here's some things that need to change. So here are my little talking balloons. That wasn't as successful as it could have been. Or that was really successful. Keep doing that. And there we go. All right. It sounds like a lot of work. It is. It's a lot of work. And I've talked to other people about this, and they're like, well, you already know this person's not really killing it. Maybe it's an up or out thing. If they're not improving, you should just think about letting them go. I personally believe that everyone can be excellent at something. This might not be the job, this might not be the place where they can do it, but there's not category errors where someone is just not good or is lazy or doesn't know what they're doing. The point of this is it's not a pip, it's a conversation. It's the first of many conversations. Now, I will grant that sometimes you do need to think about letting somebody go. So before you decide to do that, you have to get your stuff together. First of all, have you given them clear and specific feedback that needs to improve? Have you given them a chance to improve? You have to be really clear about that. And again, situation, behavior, impact is really important. Is their performance hurting the team? Because if someone is not performing and it's impacting the team, no matter how much you think, this could get better, and you have to temper that with the fact that people on the team are looking at you and they're observing you and how you're handling someone who's not helping the team. So that can do a lot of damage, so keep that in mind. And the third thing you should do is get a second opinion from someone you trust, hopefully someone who's managed people, and describe the situation. Because having another set of eyes on the situation really helps you to get some feedback yourself. Like someone could say, you know what, they've been there 3 months, you need to give them more time. Or tell me again what's going on, give me more details, and really get that sounding board happening because you need objectivity as well. And some of this advice comes from this book, which Rob Slifka recommended to me. It's a very, very good book, so if you can read this book, you should, by Kim Scott. And you may be wondering, what happened with Ted? Ted was not a success story. It didn't work out. But it was worth it for me to try out this framework with him. I've tried this framework with other people, and it has worked to great success. But with every person that you bring in, remember, you're bringing people into your company, you're hiring them, you're spending a lot of time trying to figure out what the pipeline is and get them involved. With everybody who comes in, if you think you need to let them go or you think you need to reorient them, take as much time and consideration as you would trying to bring people in. You've invited them into your place of work, so you need to be really deliberate about the way that you move them either into the next step or into some other situation. So, what are the takeaways? People are different from you. They're very different from you, and you need to not think in terms of being a manager, but think in terms of what their story is and get close to what their story is. 2, give them a project. And 3, this might not be the right job for them, but give them a project first. And you should believe what they say. Because if they're saying they want to do something, you should hear what that is. Thank you, and we are hiring.